Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Street Tales. Today I've got my good friend Bj Atkins with me, and I've got Mo, a.k.a. Kamasia Devaj. We're going to talk about training in law enforcement, and this conversation is springing off a conversation between Joe Rogan and John McPhee. He's a Tier 1 operator, and they had a 3-hour podcast, but they had like a 10-minute back and forth about law enforcement and how John felt that every road deputy or every street cop should basically be trained to the level of SWAT operator. And also he proposed like certain law enforcement should have subdivisions within the agency like the military does. And I want to dig into that a little bit. But before we get started on that train of thought, we were going to talk about overall just fitness and training and how training equals confidence and kind of what that looks like. So, Mo, I'm going to kick it to you first. We're going to kind of just focus on the fitness and the training equals confidence part, and then BJ, I'll kick it to you. Go ahead, Mo.
Awesome. Let me tell you a little background, too, about me. I've been training a lot within the law enforcement community since about roughly 2004, 2005 is where I started. And then I got into fitness for my own personal health because when I became a deputy sheriff, I look back and I probably shouldn't have. I was a big girl, we'll just say. And I realized one day I got out of my patrol car and I thought, this is crazy. I can't defend myself or help anybody if I had to. So I started educating myself on better eating, better nutrition, and how to be the 3 components in my idea of being fit, which is flexibility, strength, and cardiovascular. And I started working on all of those. And I lost somewhere roughly about 65, 67 pounds and got in pretty decent shape for what I was doing, where I felt fit. I felt like I could protect myself. I felt like I could help people if I had to get there. So just to give you kind of that background, I wasn't somebody who was always like Tyler and BJ, who was always pretty squared away and fit and played sports and did all those things. So that being said, I feel like when I did get more physically fit, it brought a level of confidence to my job that rose even more. I was always someone who knew my job very well, knew what to do, what to say, how to speak with people, which I talked about in the other episode. But the fitness component gave me that level of confidence that comes with knowing that you can protect yourself, knowing that I don't have to go to a weapon on my belt because I trusted my strength at that point. And I will say, unfortunately, in this line of work, we have a lot of officers that don't trust their own strength. And so they are quick to go to things on their belt because they don't know what happens when they get into that fight, when they get punched, when they get to where they have somebody who is actually an adversary, not somebody who just says, when I say turn around and put your hands behind your back, just does it.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off that because BJ, I think you were in the roll call one day when I came in because I am a big guy, which means my weight has fluctuated drastically, 330 to 260. I could swing that in a year or two, so it fluctuates all over the map. And one of the lieutenants was like, "Hey, Martin, your buttons are in 1024 status," meaning they're in emergency status, like they're about to bust out. And he said that in front of everybody at roll call. And so again, I do think fitness is important. And BJ and I have talked about this a lot, and I'm going to kick it to you in a second, BJ. There's a hyper focus, in my opinion, in law enforcement in general on running all the time. People will, I can run a 8-minute mile and a half. I can run a 6-minute mile. It's like, I'm not knocking anybody that can do that, but that is one aspect of fitness. BJ could deadlift 800 pounds and bench press 500 pounds. He could rip a dude's arm off. I think you need all forms of fitness. But again, it's kind of, look, not everybody can do what BJ does, and not everybody can do a 4-minute mile. And I don't think one necessarily is better than the other, but I do think having that kind of fitness that gives you personal confidence in your ability to handle yourself. And we're going to dig into this in a second, because right now we're just talking about the fitness, but also training, self-defense, jiu-jitsu, whatever it is you're fighting. Because like you said, when you don't have confidence in knowing what to do or knowing when somebody is better than you at fighting or whatever it is, people are quick to go to their gun, go to a weapon on their belt. Whereas if you have some sort of baseline understanding, then that will help you overall. But BJ, talk a little bit about fitness, because I know you and I have talked about it a lot.
Yeah, this is a topic that we've gone over. And as somebody who used to work in recruitment and screening, this is one thing that I would always kind of, I don't want to say die on the hill about, but it was something I would yell loudly from whatever hilltop I was on. I think it's very important. One, the self-confidence aspect of it, but I think it's very important to remember the function of law enforcement. Most people are calling you when they're in a situation that they feel like they can't handle, right? So when you show up, I think it's important that when you get out of that car that you display or you have some sort of confidence that you're displaying, and also that the people who are calling feel confidence in you that you can help them. Whether that be, not obviously we're talking about the physical parts here, but if you get out of the car and if I'm calling off law enforcement and someone gets out of the car who's 3 times smaller than me and can't help me with whatever situation that I have going on, my confidence, one, in the situation is dipped, and my confidence in the profession as a whole has dipped. So I think it's important that, like you said, it's a well-rounded aspect that you need for law enforcement to be good at law enforcement. But I think the physical aspect is, and I get this, not everybody wants to do the job, so the standards need to be, my PC answer is widened, maybe not necessarily lessened, but I think they're widened to incorporate the amount of people who actually want to do it. But I think I think that's a slippery slope, because we're sometimes taking people who are maybe not up to par physically at that moment. And I think that, as Mo said, if you don't feel confident in yourself, how can you help the public at Lightem if you can't necessarily even help yourself? How are you going to be a help to the community?
Fair enough. And actually, that reminds me, real quick, there was an incident. It was a domestic, and there was a deputy. I'm not going to use names, but he's a smaller guy. He's probably 5'2". Not that he was out of shape, but I got there to help him, and it was a large female. She was probably 300 plus, easy. And as soon as I got out of the vehicle, she was like, finally, a real deputy showed up. Get this junior baby deputy out of my face. And I saw his face turn bright red, and I felt bad for him. I mean, it was his case. I was there to back him up. But again, it's just an intimidation thing or a confidence thing. Maybe I shouldn't say intimidation, but sometimes that helps. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I think it is more a perception thing. I've not done a statistical study or anything like that. But what I can say is I have been teaching in the classroom for years. And one of the things I taught was communications. Part of that was always make sure when you got out of the car that your uniform was squared away, your car was clean, things like that. But also look like you are physically fit enough to do this job, because every class I always would poll them. And I had a picture that was like a collage of deputies and officers from various agencies all over the country and what happened. It would show them in uniform. And there were some that you would see overweight, sloppy, uniform, and every time I would tell them, what's your first impression? And these cadets always would say, the ones that were overweight and didn't look put together, I don't think he knows what he's talking about. I don't think he knows his job. The perception is that if you don't care about the outward appearance, how much work are you pouring into the inward knowledge part that our job requires? And it requires a lot. Whereas I'd put a picture up with officers that were sharp, squared away, fit, looked the part essentially. And every time they'd be like, that guy knows what he's talking about. I'd take a ticket from that guy. I wouldn't argue with that person. That girl looks like she knows what she's doing. And it's just because that in that split second, people are going to make a determination on not just can we do our job physically, but do we know our job? Because again, if you're not going to worry about what's on the outside, how are you actually reading your statutes? Are you doing these things? You might be, but people believe you're not.
Yeah, and that ties in, knowledge of the job itself. That was something some of our former supervisors would pound. Like, this is a profession. You have the ability to take someone's freedom away. And again, a lot of the issues, and we've talked about them on previous episodes, issues and cases that are national news, all these things, they get into trouble because you can tell they're unsure of what their abilities are. Can they arrest? Can they detain? Or do they need to turn around and walk away? They get in that gray area. You can tell they're not confident with what they're doing. And so set aside the fitness side, they're not even confident in what crime are you even working right now? And so again, this is why the conversation of training and what it means to be in law enforcement is so vast. Totally understand what you're saying. BJ, you were about to say something.
Yeah. Just to piggyback off what Mo said, I think it's important because, like you said, when you get out of the car, it's like in dating, right? Like if you're not well put together, it's like if you don't care enough about the outward stuff, do you actually care about helping me? Like, are you actually able to help me? Right. So there's a difference between being physically fit and looking the part, and again, there's no certain things you can't teach, right? You can't teach size. You can't teach. I mean, obviously you can work on your strength, but some things you can't necessarily teach. But when you get out of the car, I can't teach you to be confident, right? That comes from your own personal development, your own personal, trials and tribulations, and people can read that. You can read that and meet, like you said, Mo. As soon as you get out of the car, I can tell if you're unsure. And I've said this, and I'll say this again, time and time again. There's nothing more dangerous than a scared person with a gun.
Yeah,
100%.
And if you don't have the confidence in yourself, one, not necessarily to, at a minimum, again, there's two parts to this. I've been in plenty of fights. We've all been in plenty of fights, right? But few times has it been someone actually trying to hurt me versus getting away. But
Right.
you can tell the difference when like, oh shit, the fight is on. You actually want to do some harm to me. That's a different level of fight and a different level of upping of the ante, if you will. And if you can't handle yourself, again, I would say if anybody's, listen, if you call back up, you hit that 1024 button and that emergency button, listen, I'll drop out of the sky and I'm bringing it. So, but I expect that same level of, I expect that same thing from the people that I work with, right? So, because again, I'm not a person who calls for backup all the time. And I know there's plenty of people who don't call for backup all the time because they're squared away. So if they do ask for backup, it's like, oh, hold on a second. We have a situation on the hand because this person doesn't typically get to this point. Okay, so this must be amped out. And we've all been there. There's a person who calls for backup all the time. And instead of being like, oh shit, we need to get there, it's more like what is it this time? You know what I mean? Like, okay, what have you gotten yourself into now that now I need to come save you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that's a very big aspect. Exactly.
Hey, Mo, let me just, because you brought it up, the appearance, what you look like. BJ and I were laughing about this last night because when I first started, again, I'm a poor baby deputy. I didn't know anything, so I had a shaved head, I wore contacts, whatever. But BJ, what did you say I look like? Go ahead. Yeah, BJ's laughing because while he's catching himself, I was getting in a lot of hand-to-hand, fights. I was like, man, why does everybody want to fight me? And also, I was getting a lot of, let's say, racially charged remarks. I'm like, dude, I'm just trying to do my job. What the heck's going on? Go ahead, BJ.
So, I do remember this. And I remember we're sitting there one night. You're like, bro, I can't understand what's going on. I'm like, bro, it's 100% your appearance. You're like, what do you mean? I was like, bro, you're 6'5", tall, white guy, bald head. You wear your contacts all the time. And you present as aggressive. Like people already think, well, first of all, we work in a predominantly black or brown neighborhood. I was like, so there's already a distrust from the community in that sense. Then you get out, tall, white guy, bald head. You don't have your contacts in. So it's a different, you look like the stereotypical, we the people, racists, don't tread on me side the cop.
Go ahead, Mo.
Let me add on to that, BJ, because he not only was all of those things, but he also, when he climbed out of the car, it was like he was rising like a tree and arms out.
Yeah.
I mean, what I realized after getting to know him, that was a confidence that he carried, but he didn't get out meek, mild. He got out like, what you all want to do? Yeah,
what's going on? What's up? You called me here. What's going on? What's the trouble? What's the problem? Right? and while, yes, I think you need that. I told him, I was like, bro, it's 100% the way you present, and it's not necessarily your fault. And I know you're not trying to do this. I was like, well, let me help you. I said, grow your hair out.
Yep.
Hold it, come over. Stop putting your contacts in and wear your glasses.
Yep. And
I promise you, you'll have a completely different, well, as soon as you did that, what happened?
I don't think I've been in an actual fight since then.
Exactly.
10 years.
Don't forget, BJ, when he did that, he immediately started looking like Clark Kent. So people were like, oh God, Superman's here.
Exactly.
Oh yeah. For y'all that don't know, you got to get the shave. You got to get the bald fade on the side with a hard
line. You got to have the hard line with the comb over.
Black frame, Oakley glasses. That's how you do it. But also on top of that, I think that's when I started dropping weight. I lost like 60 pounds. So my whole demeanor and fitness level was very different. But BJ, and I'm sorry you brought this up. This is kind of how this goes. But I remember specifically. Again, we're not using names, but there was a deputy in District 1. Every fucking call, I need backup. I need. He made every traffic stop, bike stop. It seemed like the world was ending, and it's like nothing's even happening. But then there was a SWAT guy who we all knew. There was also a female. Again, not using names, but she would be like, "Yeah, show me. I've arrested 3 people by myself," and I'm like, "What? That's you." Like, I got it though. I'm fine.
I know you're talking about.
So there is a difference, and again, it's a confidence thing.
That
Yes.
the small female that we're talking about.
Female. I mean, it's just confidence.
Well, the small female that we're talking about, I remember because we were in FTL still, and she was on that squad. And I remember when she got out of the car the first time. I'm probably easily 3-4 times her size, and she got out and just her command presence alone. I was like, whatever she's talking about, I don't want any part of it. I'm good. Whatever she says to do, I got it. Because I feel like maybe she probably couldn't kick my ass, but I feel like she would take it to the max. and she had to be like, exactly. I probably end up either tased or shot if I tried to fight her back. I'm like, I'm good. I'm good.
I don't want it.
I don't want any.
Well, no, let me ask you this, because you actually train instructors how to then instruct new deputies, or new people in law enforcement. What have you seen any change, or what changes have you seen when it comes to nutrition, fitness, types of working out? So not CrossFit's not for everybody, running marathons not for everybody, whatever. Like,
right.
How would you address that, and have you seen any changes?
Yes. So I have a lot more years in like this profession when it comes to seeing the whole ideals kind of change. So when I came into law enforcement, I went in the academy back in like 1999. So back then, physical fitness was really not even built into the FDLE requirements. It has come a long way, and now it's required for you to graduate the academy. You have to do so many PT hours, they call it. It really wasn't. What you got back in 99 was what the instructors chose to give you extra. So that's why I told you guys when I entered law enforcement, I was a lot heavier. I was able to kind of make it through that situation. Now you're seeing that idea. And I will tell you, I think it comes from, when I started in 99, being a law enforcement officer was blue collar work. It was what you did when you couldn't go anywhere else. Now, I think people are recognizing this is a white collar profession. You are required to know the law. You are required to know how to communicate with people. You're required to be physically fit. You're required to do all these things when you look at the grand scheme of things. We're kind of lawyers, we're counselors, we're all these things. And now they're starting to realize this is a white collar profession. And so we need to make sure we are better preparing. We are still behind the 8 ball. Let me tell you, as someone who trains the trainer, we are way behind the 8 ball still when it comes to getting us where we need to be. But it has definitely evolved from where I came into the academy. A lot of agencies are now taking on being their own training centers, which has been huge because FELE gives us a very loose framework on what we have to teach, and they give us a lot of hours to teach it in. So there is room for us to build those programs out. And by agencies having their own training centers, they think they are doing a better job at doing it. Some of the training centers are doing better jobs at bringing in people who aren't just, oh, you're a retired cop, so we're going to bring you in and let you teach here. They're working to try to get subject matter experts that are good in this particular area to teach. So when it comes to like the PT, they're looking at people who are still physically fit, that are wanting to put the energy into creating programs for these people, because we have them for roughly 6 months in the academy. So we have to try to expose them to everything. And I know when I was teaching, we would literally build out our PT program so that we had someone who specialized in weightlifting. We had the runners. We had the people who would teach flexibility and yoga so that they got a full picture. And at the end of the academy, they could figure out what is it that they enjoyed doing so that they could hopefully continue that on once they left. And with that mindset coming around, like when I taught PT, what I would teach them is, we want you to physically push yourself. If you throw up out here, you're going to survive. That's okay. Mm-hmm. We want you to push yourself a little bit, because there's something to be said about the mental building that happens and the mental preparedness that happens when you do physically push yourself beyond where you thought you could go.
Yeah. And we did an episode. The last episode we did it with one of my Maine State Police sergeants. He was part of my cadre that trained us in Maine State Police. And BJ was surprised because it's not for every state, and we already kind of acknowledged that, but in Maine, every law enforcement, doesn't matter if deputy, city cop, state trooper, whatever, you all go to one central training location. You train there for 6 months together. And then troopers have an additional 9 to 10 weeks. It's varied whatever over the years, but they would all train together so that you knew cops from all over the state. But then with the state police specifically, when we would train, physical fitness was something we all did together, including the cadre. The cadre would work out with you.
Right.
And I know in Hillsborough, a couple would, but in general, that wasn't a thing. They try to keep that separation between we're instructors, you're the recruits. But BJ, you had some comments on that, and just could you reiterate them?
Yeah, the part I was surprised about was the actual, they call it Fight Fridays?
Five Fridays on Friday.
Exactly. So that one I thought was...
They did it every Friday for 10 weeks, not just like a one and go, hey, this is how it is. It's every Friday.
I thought that was interesting because it's similar to sports. It's like, it's hard to simulate certain things, right? So it's hard to simulate, like I said, being in a fight, what that is like physically, especially if you've never done it. And you don't want the first time I'll backtrack a second. I always think the first question that people should be asked in an interview, have you ever been punched in the mouth before? Right? Because like Mike Tyson said, listen, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth, right? What are you going to do when things don't go as planned? You get hit in the mouth, you're like, oh shit. Things are amped up. Like, are you going to panic? Are you going to remain calm? And it's hard to simulate. If you've never been in that thing, it's hard. I don't want the first time I've ever been in a fight to be on the side of the road or in a fight for my life, because you're not necessarily going to know what to do. And so the more you can kind of remain calm in those situations and not panic. And I remember the first time I ever was like, had a oh shit moment is when I wrestled a guy. And I won't leave the name out of it, but
Yep. We
had a guy who was trained in jiu-jitsu. The man had like concrete for hands, right?
Oh yeah.
And I give him like twice his size, but he's just almost just as strong as me with better technique and had the ability to stay calm. And I'm like, oh, I definitely picked his brain. And I'm like, he's like, remember, he's like, sometimes these people are fighting for their lives. They're fighting for their freedoms. Like, you are not. He's like, so you should have the ability to remain calm and not panic. He's like, they're already in panic mode. And now we got two people who are panicking. Things never work out well. like that. That's how people end up dead, right? Or really hurt because, somebody can't stay calm. But I really took that to heart and kind of, and I, to take it back to college, I know we've told the story. I've told the story a lot, but I think when it comes to necessarily like being tired or being at that exhaustion level, I said my freshman year of college, our very first fitness test, I've never been that exhausted or gassed. And I was like, that to the point I was like, I might die out here. And I'm like, I was like, I might die out here. And I'm like, that's my kind of like my standard for like, okay, where am I at on this level? And it is very, very important that people get that exposure, especially when you're in a position where you're supposed to help somebody or people are running away from you. Like I said, you got to know the difference between people are running, trying to get away, and trying to hurt you. Because like I said, if people are just trying to get away, 8 times out of 10, it's not worth amping it up. Like what does it get you another day? It's not worth anybody's life. They're just trying to get away. It's just not.
So Mo, let me ask you, I don't think I've ever asked you this, or at least we've never talked about it. And again, BJ and I are big dudes, played football, all those things, been in fights before, law enforcement. But what was that like for you? Because because I met you when you were already, had been a deputy for 10, 12, 14 years, something like that. And you were ready to go hands on, didn't give a shit, but that couldn't have been how it was at the time you started. So what was that like for you? And then how did you overcome that?
For me, like I said, when I started as a deputy, you got that first year or two, you're still learning that kind of thing. In my mind, I thought that, I'm ready for this, that, and the other. But it's funny when BJ was just speaking about his, oh, crap moment. For me, I had one as well. And I remember I was fighting a girl she might have weighed 90 pounds, maybe. She was 100% crazy. So if you can imagine, like people say, when they're crazy, the strength, they don't care about breaking bones. They don't care. So if she was probably 90 pounds and I got called there because they said it was a mental health call. And I'm like, okay. So we get there. It was like a second floor apartment. I get up there, start talking to her. Sidebar, because I wasn't in the best shape. I was a little winded when I got there already. So I'm like, all right, let me get this done.
Fair enough.
So, this is real talk. So I get there and I'm talking to her and I'm like, she's really crazy. I'm going to have to take her to big back her. And I don't think she's going to go willingly. So I grab her, and it was literally like grabbing a bull that I was supposed to hang on for 8 seconds. Now, let me also tell you, as we're talking, you know how they say in training, oh, don't talk to anybody in the kitchen. Well, that's where she was when I got there. So we are where we are. And she, in the middle of our conversation, smashes a huge bottle of mayonnaise
Oh my God.
on the linoleum floor. So imagine essentially we're ice skating now. And I go to grab a hold of her, and it's like ice skating and trying to hang on to a bowl at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I key up my radio like 6 times and not being able to say anything. They hear all the yelling. Luckily, I wasn't one of those people who still called for help a lot. Even when I wasn't in my best shape, I would make sure that I called when I absolutely needed. So when I started keying up, the cavalry's coming, and I hear them, and they're holding the station for me, and I am literally trying to hang on this girl for everything I got. We are now rolling on the ground. My arms are getting cut up with the glass from the mayonnaise. There's mayonnaise and blood now. So you got pink mayonnaise.
Oh Lord.
It's insane.
Yep.
And in that moment, my backup gets there. She rips his badge right off of his shirt when he gets there. I'm like, come on, man. We finally get control of her. EMS gets there. We get her contained. It's still a bake wreck at the end of the day, you know?
Yeah.
Even though I wasn't in the best shape, I had my wits enough to know that this girl wasn't trying to hurt me, like BJ said. She was crazy. And for her, in her mind, this was something that was life-threatening to her, too. So I was able to keep my wits and not hurt her in that instance. But when I got up, I remember my supervisor got there. She was like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm fine." And this is, mind you, first call out of the shift. We get there at 6. This is like 6:37. And I'm like, I'm going home. I'm going to go take a shower, and I'll be back when I'm back. But as I'm going through this and driving home, I remember thinking, that didn't feel good. I didn't like the feeling of that, like, oh gosh, what am I going to do? How long can I hang on? Like questioning myself in those moments. And that's when I had my light bulb moment, and I started doing things differently. And it took me, like I said, 6-7 months to lose the weight. But during that time, every time I go to the gym and I bench press, because I would run. I would go to the gym and lift, and I'd push myself. My actual training partner for a long time was a guy. So he was like, "Hey, I'm not taking anything off because I don't want to keep having to take it off and put it on."
Yeah. We just did that today.
I was stuck lifting what he lifted.
Yep.
So, and then the other part for me was later on I incorporated flexibility, because as you get older, you realize that, like, if you just lift and run, your muscles and your tendons and things like that are going to tear down. So I started working in yoga and Pilates and things like that to really stretch myself. Mm-hmm. And from that point, I realized this is where you should be from the beginning in this type of career. That was my light bulb moment, though, having that fight. And I look back now, and it's funny to think we're rolling around on the kitchen floor covered in mayonnaise and whatever else. And I'm thinking, it's funny now, but in that moment, it was enough to wake me up. It really was.
Mm-hmm. So, Mo, so for people listening who are not in law enforcement or military, it's hard to explain because, again, I'm a big dude. I grew up the way I grew up, and I'm maybe street fighter at best. I usually just use my size before getting into law enforcement. You know, I could usually manhandle somebody, whatever. But when you're a cop, you're dealing with actual, like, criminals. You're dealing with people who are in mental health crisis, whatever that is, drug addicts. I think one of the worst fights I ever got into was a dude high on PCP, because it is a level of out of your mind and a level of strength that most human beings don't have, because they don't feel pain. No, they'll fight you with a broken hand, broken arm. They don't care. It's different. And now, especially modern times, there's so much UFC stuff. People are training how to fight. So there's a lot of people who could beat the shit out of me. I mean, just is what it is. I'm not a trained fighter. So I took it upon myself, and I've done different things, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, whatever. You learn how to kind of fight so you don't hurt yourself. There's a bunch of stuff we can get into later. But this is something that's all over the media. They keep saying, why does 8 deputies need to show up? Why do so many cops need to be here? For those of you who don't understand, we don't fight fair, and we never will, because we're not trying to beat you up. We're trying to detain you, arrest you, help you, save you, whatever the fucking problem is. So we don't fight fair. We're going to roll in deep, or we're going to use tools. We're going to tase the shit out of you. We're going to paper spray you. And I think the problem is a lot of law enforcement, they're not comfortable training with those tools, because, again, you kind of get trained on it, and then that's it. For a lot of agencies, they don't spend a lot of time training, transitioning from one tool to the next, and the effects and batons and all this other stuff. There's so much training that can go on. So, but you do train, you shoot. Most law enforcement agencies minimum once a year, you shoot your gun every year. But I mean, BJ, when was the last time you trained on tasing, pepper spraying, using the baton?
3 weeks ago.
Oh my God. Before that, before that.
So I will say, currently where I work is that they do take the training aspect serious as much as you can on a large scale, right?
Yep.
It's a very large agency. It's like, I think like 10th largest in the nation, third largest just in the state.
Yep.
So there's probably almost 3,000 sworn law enforcement just in the county. But it's a lot of people to train. It's very hard to get down to the minutia of, like, training scenarios. You don't have enough time necessarily put everybody through that all throughout the year. But one thing they do is, obviously the firearms, you have to do that, but sometimes definitely there's always some sort of defensive tactic, some sort of, handcuffing or using your taser, using your tools, how to transit. As part of it is a scenario, hey, when do you transition from one thing to the next? Obviously, sometimes I would say this has been I've done a lot of things that I look back on like, damn, I probably could have done that differently, a lot safer had I just used some of the stuff on my belt and not gone to just putting paws on people, but you're like, oh, dang, I almost forgot I had a taser in there.
Yeah.
Like, dang, I could have done that a lot differently, maybe a little bit more efficient for myself had I, just used some of the tools on your belt. But at the same time, I also don't want to be dependent upon those things because the tools, they might not necessarily always work. But at the end of the day, I always got these hands to put on people if they need it. But it's like, I'm never shying away from that. And again, it's not to necessarily be boastful or bragful, but you have people who do everything to not go hands on. And I'm like, this is a profession where you do have to, you have, and again, I'm a big germaphobe. So I don't like being close to people or touching people. I was like, but this is a profession where you have to touch people. Like, you have to put your hands on people. You have to be in close proximity to people. So that is something that, again, obviously goes with the confidence in the training is, like, as we always say, me and Tyler always say this all the time, like, who's going to put the handcuffs on?
Yeah, who's going to do it?
It's like, I can run a marathon. I was like, you couldn't arrest me if I didn't want you to.
Yeah, correct.
So when you get to that mode, it's like, hey, that's all fine and dandy, but if I don't want to be handcuffed, good luck.
Yeah.
So you have, there's that aspect of that too.
Hey Mo, real quick, I'm gonna wrap up two things, but then I'm gonna kick it to you to finish off the training thing. But I do want to be respectful of your time because I want to talk about a couple other things, reference the Joe Rogan thing. So in fighting aspect, kind of what you're talking about running, it just reminded me of a story, the corporal we were talking about yesterday. I'm not a runner. My body's not built for running. So when people would take off running, if they were stupid enough to run straight down the street, I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to chase them down the road. I'm going to hit them with the door of my car. Not hit them with my car, the door of my car. Me and the corporal had a difference of opinion on that, but I ain't chasing you like that. So that ain't going to happen. But again, just to kind of reiterate, Mo, I'm going to let you kind of round it off, then we'll move on. There's a difference between being just strong in street fighting and like what BJ, like what you were talking about, we are trying to apprehend. We're not trying to, it's not a fight where we're just trying to beat the shit out of each other. That's not the goal. No. At least it shouldn't be. But Mo, go ahead. I'll let you round it off and then I'm going to move on to a couple other things.
Well, it's funny because I, besides being just a general instructor, I'm also a defensive tactics instructor. And one of the things, it's really moved towards us using a lot more of the jiu-jitsu style when we are teaching it. And when it comes to, like you said, in many cases, we might send 5, 6, 7, 8 deputies to apprehend a person or deal with a situation because, believe it or not, in most cases, that's going to lessen the opportunity for that individual to get hurt. Because if I am going to arrest somebody one-on-one and they break bad, and like BJ said, the fight is not them just trying to get away, they're trying to hurt me, my response is going to absolutely match their energy. So it's going to be a very different response. Whereas if there's me, BJ, and Tyler all standing there and that person decides that, the energy level that I'm going to have to exude is going to be a lot lower, and we're going to be able to contain the person, get them under control, get them detained, and get them arrested, probably with very little injury to that person. The opposite is where probably be the case if I am by myself having to apprehend that person and they are there to harm me. So it's been one of those things, though, I will say that with the DT training and things like that, I absolutely agree with you, Tyler, that these people, One of the things I always tell the cadets when I'm training is your agency, no matter where you work, will never ever give you enough time, money, or what to be able to train. It is going to be incumbent upon you,
Yeah.
the individual who has chosen this profession, to do some of this in your off-duty time. You will, most agencies are not going to pay you enough to train and go to the gym and work out the way you should do. So you're going to have to use your time to do that. They're not going to put you in enough of the DT classes to keep you at a level where you need to be. I suggest that all law enforcement officers do some type of training, but be very mindful of what type of training you pick. There's some training that is just not going to be applicable when you get into law enforcement. Jiu-jitsu happens to be one of those. Right. Like, you're
not kicking people in the face.
We're not doing that.
No.
Like, I did that when I worked undercover. I actually signed up and did jiu-jitsu because my thinking was I'm in the car with bad guys all the time. I didn't always have a gun because it wasn't always feasible. And I needed to feel confident with getting into a fight in small quarters if I had to. The other thing is if you're in uniform, you're almost inevitably going to fall in a fight. Jiu-jitsu teaches you a lot of being on the ground and fighting and being comfortable. The thing that deputies always want to do or officers always want to do is they fall on the ground. They're worried about getting up. If you're comfortable with being down there, and like BJ said, with the person who's calm, even in that moment, you're going to learn how to get that person in some type of hold and get them tired. So you're just hanging on until they're done, and then you can apprehend them. So those are kind of like the mindsets that we're trying to teach now in DT.
That's good. So, Mo, I appreciate that. And like I said, we're going to do additional episodes on this where we'll do deep dives on individual aspects. But two topics I want to hit on. First one is the comment that every road deputy should be trained to the level of SWAT operator. I have my opinions. BJ, I'm going to kick it to you first. Mo, you next, and then I'll round it out. And then the next part, just so we can all get it in our brains, is having like multiple operative like levels in law enforcement agency like the military does, like intel, detective work. I mean, we can expound upon that, but first part is SWAT operator status for every road deputy. And the way they said it is like everybody straight out of training should be a SWAT operator. I have my opinions, but BJ, I'll kick to you first. Mo, you'll follow it up.
I do have my opinions on that.
Go, bro.
As somebody who's been to SWAT school. Right?
Go ahead.
And, with the bomb stuff and, been in some tactical operations and tactical situations and whatnot, and also been in some other things that, we'll talk about another time. But I don't think that's a wild of a comment as you might think it is. I do think there's a different standard of training. I don't think that that's a wild take. And I say because when you think about SWAT, I don't think it's necessarily the firearms marksmanship aspect that we're thinking about when you're saying that. So I think most people say that. Most people think about marksmanship, and I'm like, that's not necessarily 100% what that all encompasses. A lot of it is just the movements and the knowledge, right? So when it comes to the knowledge and movements, like cops clear houses all the time. So cops clear houses all the time and empty rooms, you come across it like you should be to the level of a SWAT operator. Now, a lot of what the SWAT team does is they're a lot better at it because one, they do it a little bit more often, but they also work together with the same people all the time. So it looks a lot smoother.
Your take is more on the tactics.
The tactics wise, right? So I don't think that the tactics are not so unreachable or so high that they can't be done. Now the marksmanship part, if you're only shooting once a year, your marksmanship's probably not going to be on par because you're not doing it enough.
Yeah.
But to the level of like, if I come to and I say, hey, we're looking to the 2-3 side, and you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's not a hard concept to follow. It's really not. Yeah. So you should have the same terminology. When, you call the SWAT team and it's like, hey, what do we got? And you're like, we got a guy locked in the bathroom. Okay. That doesn't tell me shit besides there's somebody inside the house. Okay, thanks. Obviously, that's why I'm here. I need you to explain it a little bit more in terms of, tactics, movements. What are we looking at? So I don't think that that's a hot take to think that people should be trained up at least to that level.
Okay. All right, Mo, what are your thoughts?
I would say there's some yes and no to that. Here's why. Because I would like to understand when you say SWAT, they say I must be a SWAT operator. What's their concept of what a SWAT operator is? Because I agree with BJ that we should be preparing these people to do building searches because we are tasking them with that as something to do when they go to calls. If you go to an open door, we don't call SWAT out to clear that house. We have to do it. So if you're talking about conceptually making sure that we can do things like that, making sure we know how to properly set up perimeters, making sure that we know those kind of things, absolutely. Shooting better. I fully am on board with that. I think there are some parts, though, of the mindset of the SWAT operator that I don't think we can necessarily translate to the road deputy. Because I was a hostage negotiator at the sheriff's office. So we worked alongside the SWAT element a lot of times. And when I was there to talk, and their job was there to kill people. And that's what I wanted them to do, because I was not focused on the tactical portion that was going on. So that would be the part that I would say we'd have to make sure that part was not necessarily directly translated. Yes, we should. The road deputy has to know how to shoot, and should know how to shoot it with proficiency. But I don't know that the concept of you are there to kill people can necessarily, that's why I say the concept of SWAT training, what we have to establish, what is the concept in that response.
Sure. Yep.
One other thing, when we're talking about the firearms training, as someone who teaches firearms, a couple of years ago here in Florida, the firearms training changed a lot, and it became much more dynamic than what it was in the past. Previously, for years, from the time I was in the academy, the shooting was basically static line shooting. You didn't move. This new concept of shooting that FDLE requires, you move on every shot that you take. Yeah. So it is definitely evolving again. It's not where we should be, but we're definitely evolving to where our firearms training has changed and is getting better. And the last bullet I'd want to hit on too would be the beauty of the SWAT team is that, as BJ said, they train together all the time.
Yep.
When you're talking about making sure that these people know how to better handle open doors, talking about what's the 2-3 side, things like that, that requires unit training. When I was at the sheriff's office originally, when we went to in-service training, we went as a squad. Our entire squad would go, and there would be a squad that would come in and cover our zone. That, to me, was so beneficial, because I knew then, when we were out there training together, how well BJ shot, how well Tyler shot, how comfortable BJ was with a shotgun, how comfortable Tyler was with his AR, how we would do if we did have to shoot on the move. And so I knew if I got into a situation who I wanted there with me to do those kind of things. Now with in-service, and I know I don't know all the reason. Let me rephrase that. I don't know the reason and rationale as to why it changed, but now they do it where, 2 or 3 people might go, or one person might go or sign up. And so you're training with whoever from across the county. And that's beautiful if we are working cross county, but I don't think it works well when it's 10 of us on a squad. We're responding to calls day in, day out together. And I have no idea how you do.
Yeah. And what I'll say is this, and Mo, I appreciate it, because I'll try to wrap this up, then we'll move on to the next one. So you brought up shooting, and this is something I found that the federal system does a little bit better than locals, because at the time in Hillsborough, I think everybody was shooting Glocks, and Glock does have the ability to grow or shrink the handle of the pistol, but people can't see BJ's hands. They're gigantic bear paws. And I think when he was shooting like with the inside of his palm, because his hand is so gigantic.
Like a noisy cricket.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But then on the flip side, I've seen, again, female, male, it doesn't really matter, but people with very small hands, they were trying to extend their hand to the max that they could. Like the back of the pistol was in their thumb knuckle, and they could still barely reach it. We need to be able to, again, if you're pulling your gun out, it is a life or death situation. You shouldn't have to be worrying about how it should just fit your hand. And to my knowledge, and again, I don't have extensive knowledge of all the pistols that have ever existed or still exist, but we need to do better of trying to find a better fit. Like if you need a subcompact because you have a small hand, there should be no question about that. Well, this is how we shoot. That needs to go out the window. The tactics and the familiarization, 100% agree. And I didn't even think about it that way, the way that you proposed it, BJ. But I will say, when I was in FLETC for the Secret Service training, I could tell you there is a massive difference between military, SWAT, special forces teams and SWAT guys, especially if you're trying to apply law enforcement tactics. And I'll give one story and then we'll move on. We were working on an active shooter. We were clearing a building, and they were like, all right, this suspect's shot in the leg. He's down, but he's still alive. The point was, law enforcement, you're supposed to detain him, call whatever, before moving on to the next one. You got to deal with the suspect. Well, there were 2 special forces guys. They just double tapped him in the head, and Joe executed him and kept moving. They're like, whoa. That is not what we do. They're like, well, I can't keep moving. I can't have a suspect in my back. Like, bro, you are not at war. This is law enforcement. I can't just execute motherfuckers because they're behind you. That's not how that works. And also, when you got people running, they're not enemies. These could be people fleeing. They're trying to get away. They're trying to get out. They're scared, whatever. And so there's a mindset that goes into it. So I agree with that aspect. Again, we're going to do more episodes. We're going to dive in deep on these things, but I just kind of wanted to address these few points. We'll do the same kind of flow. And then Mo, I know you got a heart out. The subcategories of law enforcement. And BJ, you had some, I have my opinions on how it should be because the way I heard the concept is we have patrol deputies, we have detectives, we have intel, we have undercover, we have kind of those things. One, not every agency can afford to do that because of manpower. And two, there is I don't know if it's cultural, but basically you're seen as kind of less than if you're on patrol. Like, oh, that's just entry, that's entry level patrol. And I know for a fact, certain agencies, why don't you want to be a corporal? Why don't you want to be a detective? Why don't you, whatever? Why don't you want to expound upon and move on beyond patrol? Well, why? It shouldn't be seen that way. But BJ, you had more strong opinions on that. I'll kick to you, and then Mo, I'll let you round it off before you got to get a heart out.
Yeah, I don't know if it's, I guess you could say strong opinion on it, but I think it's, and to piggyback off what Mo said earlier, I think it is I don't think it is necessarily a blue collar job per se, because you're tasked with so much and have so much knowledge. Like, I have a master's degree.
Yeah.
Like, it's not blue collar's work. You know what I'm saying? I've done what I've done on the academia side and on the professional side, with career wise. And so, but right now I work in patrol. So some people, like you said, will look at you and be like, oh, it's almost like it's, I don't want to say frowned upon, but like they're like, oh, well, how come you're not, like, some of these other positions are seen as higher on a hierarchy of level of importance.
Yeah.
I have a different opinion on that. Some people like where they are. I was like, but you also don't necessarily need to, like, if some of your best people still need to be on the front line. I think that's a majority of where your best people should be for the type of job that it is. Right. So you have people who are, how do I stay PC with this, who are a little bit more administratively strong that probably wouldn't be your best frontline person. You know what I mean? So some of that is delegation and seeing who's a better fit. I know that there should be some, and this is in every profession, some supervisors probably wouldn't necessarily be good leaders of men and women.
For sure.
But they're still the supervisor, right? So, and that I think that's probably a different cultural thing around the country or depending on the agency where you are. But I think that is a stigma that goes around that I don't want to say should be addressed, but I think could be addressed as to why people are in certain places. It might not necessarily be for the reasons that you think,
Mo, go ahead. I know you got a heart out, so go ahead and wrap it.
No, it's fine. I just want to get some clarity on the show because I did not watch or listen to the podcast. What was their stance? I'm confused a little bit on what their stance was when it came to law enforcement having detectives and these other positions.
Basically saying that when plausible, not everybody should be a patrol deputy. If you're out of shape or whatever issues you might have, again, you don't need to be a great law enforcement professional, but also be, an Olympic athlete or anything like that. There's great detectives that I would say probably couldn't run a mile or do a pull-up, but it doesn't mean they're not proficient in the art of law enforcement or the profession of law enforcement. And so there should be places where you can put people that, and basically like your frontline patrol, those should be the most highly trained, highly educated, most experienced individuals. And then there should be, I don't want to say less than because that's not what I mean by that, but there should be other areas where you can, attempt to excel or push the law enforcement, like analysts, intel. Yeah. Again, I'm not trying to get too deep in it, but that was kind of the concept. It's like not everybody should be on the road, and I definitely agree with that. But it doesn't mean just because you can't be on the road, you shouldn't be a cop or that you couldn't do something in the profession of law enforcement.
I get it. So, and where I do agree, I think that your people on the road should be your highly trained people. And many agencies where I see a disconnect a lot is you will have someone who's on the road and they are killing it. They know their stuff. They are good with engaging with the community. They are fit. They are all these things. And instead of incentivizing them there, they will tell them, you need to get promoted or you need to look for a detective position. And that person says, no, this is all I've ever wanted to do. and they push that person out of that position because they feel like they need to do something different. I disagree with that. And that happens also in the detective's positions. You'll have detectives that'll be like, I just like doing burglaries, so I want to be a burglary detective for the rest of my life. And they will want to push them out of that position. Well, no, you need to get promoted. Maybe you'll become the sergeant over burglaries, and now this person's whole demeanor changes because that wasn't what brought them happiness. That the joy for them was being that burglary detective or being the road deputy. That's where I think there's a major disconnect. But I do agree that your people who are on the road should be your highly trained people. They are your first line of defense. That's what everyone sees when you look at the media. That's what's on the media. That's what people talk about. Very rarely do you hear stories that are surrounded around a detective so-and-so did this. It's going to be surrounded around that road deputy that responded out to a call and either went good or it went really bad. That's what it boils down to. So having your cream of the crop on the road, I think that's an amazing thing. And if you have someone who stays there and doesn't have any interest of going anywhere, incentivize them in that position. If you have someone who's on the road and does want to get promoted, help them get promoted. Also, they will put people in positions sometimes and it's like, oh, you're really good. So they'll lock them in. So it's like a double-edged sword a lot of times. Yeah. So I do agree that if you have people who, like BJ so eloquently put it, are more administratively strong, move them from the road and put them in administrative positions, and don't put them in situations where they will be that person that's on the road screaming for help at every call, because that's not their strong point.
Correct. Mo, I know you got a heart out, so anything you want to end with?
No, I've I was curious how this would go with the three of us, and I absolutely loved it. This is why I loved working the road with y'all, because I think that we were always open to listen to each other and share ideas. We didn't always agree, but we were good at listening and bouncing things off of each other and being better as a result of it.
Absolutely. Mo, I appreciate you.
Thanks, Mo.
So BJ, Mo had a heart out, but I wanted to kind of flesh out the concept of different divisions, I guess, within law enforcement. And again, for those listening, not every agency has the ability to do that. I think New York has like 20,000. LA has 30,000 sworn law enforcement. I mean, there's departments that are massive, and they have intel divisions, foreign contact divisions, where they're dealing with like liaisoning with international law enforcement communities. But the concept of being on the road, and I'm not trying to put any one agency on blast because it's not just Hillsborough. There's other departments where it's basically everyone starts out on the road, and then you go to like, a street crimes division, then you go to detective, and kind of like what Mo was talking on. If you want to be a detective, that's all you ever wanted to do. Well, you're tying up a spot for somebody who also either wants it or needs it to get promoted.
Mm.
And so you kind of create a system where you're forcing people out of something they are very good at, or that's what they love to do. They're very comfortable and confident there, and you're bogging the system down. I will say, working on the federal side, they might be a little better at it only because they have more funding, they're larger. But I mean, with the Secret Service, you have everyone starts out in phase one. So you're working at a field office, you're doing financial crimes, you're liaisoning with local PD. I mean, I say this all the time. If I could have stayed in Maine as a Secret Service guy, I would have done 20 years there easy because I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not how the system works. You have to go to phase two, which is detail time. That's where you go to the presidential protection side or the vice presidential protection side. And it drives me insane because Secret Service, that's where they lose. Last time, I'm trying to remember these conversations, but it was anywhere from 70 to 80% of everybody who quits from phase one to phase two, or they quit while they're in phase two because it is a different beast. Not everybody wants to do that. You don't want to live somebody else's life. You don't want to travel all the fucking time. You want to be home with your family. But there's zero mechanism for anyone to avoid phase two. There's been some one-offs where people got to avoid it, but they had special skill sets or they just hit the timing right, whatever the point might be. And then you go into phase three where you can either stay in DC, detail, and pretty much that's how you advance up. And that's most of the people who are directors or higher level 8th floor people, they all stay in DC, and that's why they want to do it. Or you go back to the field office, or you can go overseas. But like there's ways for you to kind of move on. But the way the Secret Service was set up when I was there, you had to do 6 years on the detail. It's really more like 8 because that's typically if you're ever going to get promoted on the detail, then you go to phase 3. That's a long time to do something you are not really fond of and be away from your family.
Yeah.
I don't know how that can translate to a local agency, but can you talk about your experience with that?
Yeah,
Like you said, you're on the road and you love being on the road. You've been on the road.
I do enjoy it. So I think one, like you touched on just a second ago, I think part of it is the size of the agency, right?
Yep.
So if you have an agency that's large enough that you can move around and they have all these different avenues of opportunity, that I don't want to say it makes it easier, but you have plenty of different roads that can be walked, right? That you can seek out and kind of try and dabble in some different things. Luckily enough, the agency I'm at right now is like I said, it's the 10th largest somewhere in there in the whole country, right? So there's plenty of things to be done, plenty of different things. There's marine unit, there's port, there's the street cops, within the area that you work, there's all these different things within that. And then as the agency as a whole, there's also other things, right? So there are plenty, and I've done plenty of things in my career. I've been in different spots, different sections. So I've gotten to see different areas and it's a good thing because I don't think I've ever been necessarily like pigeonholed into one thing where I never felt like I had to stay a place just to kind of like get somewhere else. I do know of there being other situations. Again, this is something that's kind of morphed and changed over time. You don't have to go over here. You don't have to go right 2 steps in order to go left 3 steps. You don't have to necessarily do that anymore, right? But what I can say is sometimes it is really just about timing and what things coming up. For example, like I said, we've talked about this. I'm on the bomb team, so that spot is not a spot that just comes. It's not something that you can just. It doesn't come available every single year. You kind of just have to get it, or when the opportunity comes, you have to try it, and if you get it, you get it. I was lucky enough that I was at a point in my life where I was already. I wonder if I talked about this on the last episode. I was at a point where I was in talks to go to the ATF.
Yeah,
I already had my offer. I was out the door, and I said, "Hey, I'm gonna try for the bounty. If I make it, I'll stay, and if not, I'm out of here." Right? Got lucky enough, I made it, so I stayed. Clearly, still here, and absolutely love it. But but again, depending on what agency you are, because I know people who are, and that's the good thing about being on the bounty team. I know people in different agencies all over the country, and we all kind of get together from time to time. You see people at trainings, and we all talk about our different career paths at said agency, right?
Yep.
I've talked to people before who are like, "Hey man, like being a bounty tech is a career path where they are," right? So, for example, I could talk about this because I don't work there, but NYPD, every bounty tech is a detective. That is a section of the NYPD is the bounty squad. There are detectives. They have a lieutenant. They have this. They have this. So you can promote a little bit within that section because the agency is so large. You can do that. Now, if you're at a smaller agency, middle of America, your team might be 3 people.
Yeah.
For the state, so that is a career path in and of itself because just the size of the agency, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think you should have specialty teams. Obviously, you need it it should be dependent upon where you are and the needs of your agency. Now, depending on where you work, there could be stigmas for that.
Yeah.
And I think I'm paraphrasing for you here, and I think that's kind of what you're alluding to is the stigmas that come with some of the special team and navigating that because it is, for example, sometimes, like I said, NYPD, for example, that's a career path, right? Some people, it's a part-time team. So It could be a help in the long run. It could be a hindrance in the long run. So that just I think it's more just so dependent upon where you are and where you work.
So we're friends, so I agree with the statements you're making. And I'm not here offering solutions to this because again, every agency is a little different, but let's talk a little bit about special teams just to round this out because like you said, there are differences. And I think you referenced NYPD. I think a lot of the reason they do that is for pay. You are a specialty. Again, every agency is different on how they pay their special teams, their detectives, whatever. But as we used to always say on the Secret Service side, that's a different pot of money. So if you're a patrol guy, that's a pot of money. If you're a bomb guy, that's a pot of money. If you're a detective. So if you're a detective for the specialty, then they can pay you commensurate with your training, whatever else you got going on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily disagree with it in that concept because you are doing something above and beyond typical law enforcement. But we had Sergeant Farley on, and I worked for Maine State Police. And the SWAT team in Maine State Police, when I was there, was 23 people for the entire state. That's it. So on the SWAT side, they were all, everyone on SWAT, there's different trainings. And for people who are in law enforcement or on SWAT team, I never was. I'm not saying I was. They have snipers. They have breach and entry. They have explosive, not necessarily bomb techs, but explosive breaches, things like that. But those are all separate trainings. And some of the larger agencies that have full-time SWAT teams, they will have they'll have a couple guys that are snipers, a couple guys that are medics, a couple guys, whatever. Main State Police, every SWAT guy was expected to be a sniper, explosive breacher, and a medic. So depending on where you were in the state, if they got a quorum, which I think was 5, they would just, hey, you're the better sniper, you're the better medic, whatever. But they all had that baseline training, so then they could fill those gaps. Because if you only had 2 snipers in the state of Maine, it's like, all right, he'll be here in 8 hours. That doesn't necessarily work. Again, the thing about law enforcement, there is no one size fits all.
No.
Also, if you're in Oklahoma, you don't need a Marine unit because you don't have a port, you don't have an ocean.
Exactly.
I joked yesterday on the episode with so the father, actually, I don't know if it was on the episode or not, because I went from being a deputy to a trooper. And Hillsborough County, we had aviation, K9. I mean, we had it everywhere.
Yeah, this was on that episode, but go ahead.
Was it on it?
It wasn't on it. Go ahead.
Okay. We were just talking. So Hillsborough, I'm chasing a burglary suspect on foot, robbery, whatever. Immediately get on the radio. I need aviation, K9, whatever. Set a perimeter. That's what I knew. I went through the 9 weeks of training, which again was great training, but it was baseline training. They didn't there wasn't really an explanation that, hey, Maine State Police doesn't have aviation. We have a fixed wing that's 4 hours away. We have 1 pilot. In K9, there's 10 K9 units for the state. So I get a burglary down the southern tip of Maine, right on the New Hampshire border. And I'm chasing this dude on foot in the woods. And I get on the radio and I'm like, I need aviation, K9. I need to set a perimeter. I'm doing all this stuff. Well, my phone starts going off. I ignore it. Goes off again. I'm like, okay, what's going on? It's my sergeant. I call him. All right, I answer. He's like, what are you doing? Stop right now. So I was like, what, sir? He's like, did you just call for aviation? We don't have that. And did you call for K9? I was like, yeah. I was like, I need K9. He's like, they're 3 hours away. He goes, 9 people live there. Stop it. We'll find them. Turn around and go back. So again, there's not one size fits all, but I do see a need. And again, law enforcement is so vast in the things that they deal with. And every agency has budget constraints. They have personnel constraints. But again, from your experience, Hillsborough, again, large agency, they have all those things. What is your opinion on that as far as law enforcement focus?
So I think there's a need for it, right? Because in just the area that I work in, there are different types of needs, right? So I think if you have the need and you have the ability to fill the need, that you should. Obviously, we have a port there. We have a lot of water, so we have marine divers, right? So we also have topside guys who are what we call MOBT, right? So maritime operation bomb tech. So I'm one of those, and this is basically the top side of the diving portion. I'm supposed to be doing the dive program this coming year, but we also have on the other side you have your SWAT. We call it tactical bomb tech, right? Who get into the stack operationally with our SWAT team, for quick hardline, I say this very loosely, the movie type stuff that you see, oh man, there's a tripwire, how to get rid of that, how to deal with pipe bomb, that kind of thing. So if you have the ability to do it, I think you should. And a lot of the training comes not necessarily from the local side, but our team is FBI certification. So a lot of that stuff comes from the FBI determines who gets a team, what kind of trainings are available. So it's easy to send guys to these trainings when the agency's not having to pay for it. Yeah. Right? It's federal funding. Same thing with SWAT team. You have your snipers, you have your SWAT medics, you have your breachers, you have all this kind of stuff. So I say if you need it and you can fill it, and you should fill it, it makes the job a lot easier. When you're like, hey, I need this. Oh, this guy on the team specializes in this. We're going to call him. This guy's special, and it's some of those things you find out within the team, like our team. There's some guys who are better at driving the robot. Some guys who are better at, technical side. Some guys, obviously, who are divers. Some guys, when it comes to the boats. My philosophy for tying knots is tie a knot, or tie a lot. Can't tie a knot, tie a lot. Yeah. Some guys grew up on the boat. They can tie hey, what kind of knot you need? Oh, okay, boom, boom, boom. It'll take them 2 seconds, right? So I was like, yo, hey, can can you instruct me how to cut this knot? Cause that's not my deal. You know what I mean? And some guys who have, who do have breaching experience are like, hey, this is what I'm looking to do. I'm trying to, solve a problem that we have. And you have guys who are able to do that. So I think it is a great thing when it comes to within teams.
Absolutely. And it ties into, and I'm going to ask your thoughts on this. And I want to bring up one case, I guess, but it was in Hillsborough County. It was probably 10 years ago. Avon, not Avon in the nice area, Alpha 2, but I can't remember what.
Avila. Yeah.
Avila. Thank you. And basically what it appears to be, and I haven't followed up on it, and the point of the case is not where I'm going with it, but basically it appears the dad killed his whole family and then himself. And then they were going, as law enforcement, Hillsborough County was going in, explosions started happening, but they were timed explosions.
Yes.
If you can speak on it.
I remember
There was
this.
timed explosions, so they all had to back out. And it was like every, 10, whatever the time was, 5-10 minutes, a boom, 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 boom. But it was a big house. So it was basically he had rigged the whole house to explode at different intervals. My assumption is to take people with him, also to destroy any evidence in the house. But it's a two-part question to that. One, if you have any insight on that, I'll ask you about it. But two, a lot of people, the stigma he's talking about is if you're a SWAT guy, a bomb guy, Marine guy, aviation guy, whatever it is, they're like, oh, they're not good cops. They're not good detectives. They don't know how to do casework. That's why they did that. They're good with guns and fighting, but they're not. I severely disagree with that. I think that you should be a good cop. You should be a good investigator, because even in the midst of all the chaos that's going on, you're creating a case. You have to then, like we always say, all the fun things that you see on TV and the movies, all I think about, that's a lot of paperwork.
A lot of paperwork.
Car chases, shooting somebody, kicking in doors, blowing shit up. That is a lot of paperwork. And you need to have extreme confidence in, one, your abilities, but two, you have the right to do that. You can't just be blowing shit up.
Let alone the liability.
Also the liability. Correct. Absolutely correct. So I'm going to ask you, one, do you have any insight? Now, it's like on the fringes of my memory, the Avila house.
I do know.
So what you think about this?
I do remember pieces of that case, and I don't think he rigged it. I think what there was fireworks fireworks in the garage.
Okay.
And I don't know if something caught on fire, and the fireworks in the garage started going off at intervals. It was hot. So that's what it was. I do remember that case. Obviously I wasn't on it, so I don't remember all of the nitty gritty details, but I do remember that being a point of discussion because of the explosion part. I remember reading some of the brief about just that part, because on the bomb scene part of what we do is firework disposal. And yes, actually, surprisingly enough, one of the most dangerous things that we do on the team is firework disposal, because even though some of the stuff is commercially made, you don't necessarily know how it's stored, the volatility of it, like, where it's been, is it wet, is it dry, is it something been added to it, right? So highly, highly dangerous. I forgot the other question. What was
the other part was, do you need to be a good investigator to be on the specialty team? I think that you kind of, you weren't good as an investigator, so you did the specialty.
Well,
that's a stigma.
I hear the stigma, but if people knew the process to get onto these teams,
well, go ahead.
Right? So
again, I never was on a specialty team.
Right.
I respect it. I've worked with them, but I would not one.
So and obviously I can speak to the team that I'm on.
Go ahead.
Right. And it was a 3-day tryout. Right. So you had to have, I don't think so you had to have, but it helped to have a knowledge of biology, chemistry, all these, mechanics, electronics, rad nuke stuff. Right. So all these things that are encompassed within just that one specialty team discipline is highly narrowed and refined to be not just to be a good overall bomb tech, not even get into your specialties within that part of the profession. You are more highly scrutinized, right? So, so where the stigma may come from the public on the other side, within the agency, people are looking to you for the answers, right? So you may have a lieutenant call you up and say, hey, I got this suspicious package. I don't know what to do with that. So you're expected to have the expert in said field, so it's like, hey, if things get too hairy for patrol, hey, we're going to call SWAT team. So you're expected to be a step above or a level above your typical patrol or your typical, even your supervisor or whatever. They're looking to you for the answers, even though you're not, quote unquote, in the same position that they're in, right? They're calling you for a reason. So it does take a different level of scrutiny. People are looking at your background more, what you've done more. We go through your IA jacket. We talk to your supervisors. We talk to all those people because of what it looks like on the backside. And that's it. You're obviously your representation of the office, but you're also a representation of yourself, but legally, liability wise, all right, we got to make sure you're squared away. Like I've taken the psych test 4 times.
Oh,
Because they're like, hey,
barely passed.
exactly. Luckily it's pass fail. So like, hey, it's already crazy enough to want to be a cop. Now you want to go do something that might get you blown up. Let's make sure you're not crazy.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, exactly. What's wrong with you, right? And so I think the stigma comes from maybe outwardly the public of not knowing what goes into it.
Yeah.
And I think some of the stigma, like you said, the stigma comes even just in patrol wise. I don't think patrol guys are good investigators. I was like, but how do you think the detective got all the information to investigate your case?
Yeah, fair enough. Correct. Fair enough. So I think it's a pretty good summary. Again, like I've alluded to several times in this episode, but we're going to do some deep dives as we get into it. But again, a patrol officer, deputy, cruiser, state troopers, they like to say cruiser. They got to be different. You got to have a baseline knowledge of when to call, how to call, because you don't want to waste somebody's time.
Exactly.
But again, there needs to be that heightened level of specialty because once again, you're walking into a scene, you have no idea. You as the front line, first line investigator, you need to be able to articulate what it is you see.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know how to fix the, brand new people, because you got people that are just out of training on the road, and then you've got people who've been there for 20 years on the road. There's a vast array of knowledge that goes into that, and you don't know how you're going to react until it happens to you. Sure. I'll finish with this because it's a question that's come up, and then we'll wrap up this episode. I'll talk briefly on the Butler, Pennsylvania, the attempt on Trump, because I knew I was still working with the Secret Service when that happened, and I knew a lot of those agents that were there. I'm not going to use names. I'm not going to go Dan Bongino on it. One, I'm not big enough to do that, so they can crush me. But you don't know how you're going to react until you get shot at. Nobody knows. So a lot of hate was on the female that couldn't get her gun in the holster. I know her. I worked with her. She's a great agent. She was stressed out, and she was missing her holster. I mean, that's really all it was. It looked horrible on national TV, but she's not a bad agent. You know what I mean? And Secret Service is very different than law enforcement. I used to tell everybody all the time, I'm not in law enforcement. We do protection because it's very different. The rules are different. The policies and the statutes that protect or direct the Secret Service are extremely different than local law enforcement or actually any federal law enforcement agency in the country. But that, unfortunately, was upper management and policy. Trump at the time was a former president. That's how they saw him. He hadn't been officially nominated as the Republican candidate. So he wasn't entitled to all the resources. They talk about the drones and why were there so many? The Secret Service had to use temp, HSI, different federal law enforcement agencies. And again, I'm not knocking anybody that was there because if you're not Secret Service, you did not go through 9 months of training plus typically to get to a detail you've been on for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, whatever. You haven't done protection. Same with locals. There was a miscommunication. The side agent was also new, relatively brand new. Again, I'm not going to use names. Was also brand new. I don't know what that brief looked like. I know that individual requested Secret Service agents, wasn't given them, and they were operating. Again, might get a lot of hate, but I'm not agreeing with how anything was done. I do think there needs to be a complete overhaul of the way that protection is done, but I can't change what was already done. So you had a new agent as the site agent trying to deal with 5,000 people on an outdoor event. They were advised that local sniper team would be on the roof where the assassin was. They didn't show up for whatever reason, or they weren't on the roof. The Secret Service sniper shows up the day before. Again, I'm not sitting here trying to defend one way or the other. I'm just telling you this is how it happened. They were briefed. There will be a local sniper on that roof. So when you see him pausing, like, who is that? What is happening? What? I see a guy in camos with a rifle. Is that us? Is that local? Or did they? Who is that? You kind of see him dancing around because he doesn't want to kill a cop or, some kid that just climbed up on a roof. There's a lot that goes into it. The other part that was missing because there weren't enough Secret Service agents. When you have Secret Service sniper, they call it counter snipers. You're supposed to have a special agent with the Secret Service as your counter sniper watch. Hey, I see something. Go tell me what it is. They have direct comms. They have direct links. That wasn't the case. It was a local cop or detective or whatever. It was a local. So there's delay in how that all went about. He climbs up on the roof. The local cop does. He sees the guy on the roof. The guy turns, points his gun at him. He lets go, falls off the roof. I'd probably do the same fucking thing. It's just my head poking over the roof and the guns are right in my face. So there was a delay, and that's when the guy turned around and started shooting at Trump and hit the people and killed people in the audience. That's when you see the counter sniper take the shot and execute. Then you go into, well, hey, he was there for an hour. He was patrolling. Where was the drones? Where was the counter surveillance unit? Trump didn't have any of that because he's a former. So there was none of that there. Now there's people saying that locals offered a drone. They turned it down. I can't speak on that. I was always, whenever I did sites and whenever I did my job, anybody who wanted to come and play, you want to offer cameras, I would say yes to everything, and we'd all have it in the command post. For whatever reason, wasn't done that day. So this ties into experience, training, being stretched too thin. I have to be careful because I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about how many protectees they have, but they're trying to minimize the amount.
Mm-hmm.
What I'll say is it's way more than it should be. There's people that Secret Service are protecting that I think should have a different form of protection, not Secret Service protection. Because when you're Secret Service, you're trained at the highest level. You're trained to protect the president, vice president. We do very minimal, small detail, whatever. So, and again, there's just not enough bodies to be in the Secret Service. So that kind of rounds out the street side, federal side, and kind of what happened. And hopefully I did a good job. At some point I dive deeper. I know it's still kind of going on, and I'm not trying to get myself in trouble, but I wanted to touch on it. But everyone, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I just wanted to address a few things on fitness and law enforcement, training and law enforcement. And there's a massive difference between military and law enforcement and their goals, their function, their mission. And again, I look forward to diving in deeper on those things. BJ, I appreciate you.
Of course, brother.